A few years ago, I had a strange series of break-ins that started when my apartment complex hired an out-of-town crew to do the exterior painting. They were a rough-looking bunch that regularly, but mildly, catcalled and stared at me when I had to walk past them. The complex manager left a note that they would be power washing and then painting the balcony, so everything on it had to be moved inside. I had a pet cat at the time and lived on the second floor, so I would leave the sliding door part-way open so he could come and go. His box was out on the balcony. I totally spaced that we'd have workers on our balcony and left the slider open. I came home that day, before my roommate, to find a very personal item of mine that was kept in my underwear drawer propped up on a small table, which was about the first thing you saw when you walked through the front door. So there it is, staring at me in the most unusual of places. My first thought, roommate was playing a really weird and highly inappropriate joke on me, but that wasn't really his style. Once that checked out, it wasn't him. Panic starts setting in, but I don't notice anything else out of place. And there was also some cash and some jewelry where this item was kept. Both of those things were undisturbed. My thought process was that there was no way someone would break in to go through my drawers, not take anything, but put my toy on display. So I put the toy away and let it go. Until the next day when I got home from work. There's a small, two-tiered wooden end table, looked old, like from a thrift store, set up outside my door with the following items: a small statue, still burning incense, a used but not still burning candle, crystals and a decorative rock, and a plant. I immediately start going door to door to ask my neighbors if they did it, or may have seen someone putting it up. No one saw anything. I then call anyone I knew who might do such a prank to let them know I'd be calling the police and having the items fingerprinted, so the jig was up. But they all gave me the same response. That not only was it not them, but to call the police. Immediately. I'm pretty freaked out at this point, so I wait in my car for my roommate to get home and go inside to scope things out, and wait for the police, who wouldn't be there for about an hour. The first thing I noticed was there were 2 small picture frames along my windowsill, and the pictures had been removed. One of them was me and my son, and one of me and my best friend. I go into my bedroom and the toy from the previous day was on my bed. At this point, if it were a movie, you'd be yelling at me to get the hell out of there and never return. But strangely, when you are in the situation, it all seems so surreal. You're in your own house, surrounded by your familiar things, and you just don't feel a sense of immediate danger. You just keep thinking that there has to be some reasonable explanation. Someone's gonna fess up that they're messing with you. The cops show up, take prints, take one look at the shrine, and tell me I should be very concerned and should consider moving. My roommate understood, of course, so I made arrangements to move out over the next couple days. Nothing in those next couple days happens, except for sometime during the night, after the cops left but before we could do it, the shrine was taken down. Then reappeared the next day while we were at work. But it was immediately removed by my roommate before I got home. Now it's moving day, and I'm taking apart my bed. I move the mattress, and in between the mattress and box spring, I find a camera. The old school film kind that didn't belong to me or anyone I know, and a couple other picture frames that had been taken apart and had the pictures removed. One of which was a picture of me and my friend, but the sexier pics of us had been removed. I have the police come back out to take pictures of my room and take the camera for potential evidence. I specifically asked to never be alerted to what was on the film if developed, unless I absolutely had to be, and I never heard anything back from them. No idea what, if anything, was on the film, but it still creeps me out to this day. I have a very light dating history, not to mention I live with a male roommate, and I'm close with my son's big weightlifter father who comes by every few days. I honestly don't believe it was anyone I know. The cops were pretty certain it was someone on the painting crew, as they had access, and it started the day they had been on the balcony. To my knowledge, nothing ever came of it. I was out of there in 2 days and never looked back. My old roommate never had anything strange happen again. When I tell the story, it feels like something that happened to a friend. Or in a movie.
I've never been the type of person that gets caught up in the idea of paranormal activities or ghost stories, but this still creeps me out to this very day. Even at a young age, those types of ghost stories just seemed completely unbelievable, and I could never take them seriously. With that being said, what I'm about to say is something that happened to me a few years ago that pretty much changed all of what I believe. It's not a really scary story, but I think the simplicity of it is what really spooked me out as much as it did. And still does when I think about it. My mom was in the real estate business, which often required her to check out houses on her own before taking her clients with her. She would usually just do this on her own, but every once in a while she would take me with her. Well, this house comes on the market that a few other agents apparently say is haunted, and my mom figured she'd take me along. Sure, why not? I'll be honest. The house was pretty creepy. Completely covered in vines, but whatever. It's an old house. Not really a big deal or that out of the ordinary. We go in and look around the first floor. And for the most part, it seems like a lot of houses she takes me to. Still furnished, but has that smell of a house that's been empty for a while. The first thing that struck me as a little bit odd was that they had one of those really old-style box TVs, and it was playing some old black and white World War II documentary. It just made the house feel really old and gloomy. We eventually made our way upstairs to look at the bedrooms. The second floor was set up so that there was one long hallway with 2 or 3 doors staggered down the length of it. The first room was normal enough, but as we got to the second room, we saw it was completely full of stuffed animals, but not the toys. It was a whole room dedicated to real animals that had been stuffed, even though I thought that was really strange and pretty creepy. The room was normal besides that. Neat, and nothing out of place. Wanting to get out of the room, we went down the hallway to check out the final bedroom, which again, was fine. We're on our way to go downstairs, and for some reason, as we pass the second room, I look back in and immediately stop in my tracks. There was now a chair directly in the center of the room. We were both positive it wasn't there before, as we would have literally walked into it when we were in the room a few moments ago. But nonetheless, there it is, sitting directly in the middle of the room, like it was meant to be there. Obviously, we got out of the house pretty quickly after seeing that. It was something so simple, just a chair. But what really got me was that there was no explanation for it. Well, from the way it was positioned, I can think of one explanation for it. But how did it get there? We were the only 2 people in the house, and neither of us went off on our own to check out a room without the other. So how the hell does a chair randomly move in the weirdest room in the entire house? I consider myself a pretty logical person, and the fact that I can't think of a single reasonable explanation for what happened is why thinking about that house still disturbs me so many years later. In the few years after we looked at the house, it has sold 5 or 6 times, with almost all the homeowners saying that strange things would happen when they were in the house, like someone didn't want them living there.
In senior year of high school, I used to drop my friend off at her house after school. Since we had taken summer school to get ahead, we only had half days, and it was the middle of the afternoon, and my parents weren't home. After dropping her off, I pulled up to a light and felt someone looking at me. I looked over to see some guy in sunglasses in another car looking at me. Not thinking much of it, I smiled and nodded my head hello. Shortly after that, he caught my attention again and signaled for me to pull over. That's when my stomach dropped, and I got this awful feeling as the blood drained from my face. I shook my head no and looked straight ahead. I refused to look at him as he continued to try and get my attention right next to my car. Eventually, he slowed down, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Until I realized he was following me. At this point, I was pulling into our neighborhood and freaking out. If I pulled into my house, no one would be home and I would be very vulnerable, considering I was a very petite 17-year-old girl. Plus, he would permanently know where I live, and he already knew I got off school early. I panicked and decided the best thing to do was drive past my house until he stopped following me. I ended up driving around our neighborhood for a good 15 minutes, with him following. I think he eventually realized I was onto him and stopped following my car. At the time, I thought it was no big deal, but looking back on it, I realize how seriously bad that could have ended for me.